joining us today. Today we're extremely fortunate to be joined by Julie and Andrew. I want to start by asking you both, something that will probably be quite obvious from the outset to our viewers, is that whilst neither of you are Uyghur yourself, you're both activists standing up against what's happening in Xianjiang towards Uyghurs with concentration camps. Andrew, why is it that you've gotten involved in this area, raising awareness about freedom of religion in China?
I don't look at myself as an activist. This is something I just didn't feel I could sit at home and let happen. My family were in concentration camps 80 years ago. They were also in extermination camps later on, because if unchecked, that's what concentration camps turn into. History has proven that. And anybody who's studied the Holocaust, to my mind, can see it happening again. And for me, sitting at home was not an option. I don't call that being an activist. I just call that being me. And some part of me finds it difficult to figure out why more people aren't taking the same standpoint.
Julie, why did you feel like you had to get involved?
I actually heard about what was happening while I was living in China. My husband is Han Chinese and he looks Uyghur. And we started noticing a few years ago that we were getting frequently stopped by police in China and harassed essentially based on his appearance, basically. And so essentially we overheard what was happening from Chinese officials themselves before it was really being covered by the Western media. And when we started being told things directly, such as, Uyghurs are not allowed to carry passports, you need to hand your passport over, or, Uyghurs aren't allowed to travel freely, what are you doing in this town? Or things like that, it really raised a red flag. And so I started kind of digging and asking questions from friends that were in the region, trying to get some more information. And as Andrew said, I think for those of us that have studied the Holocaust, we immediately recognize the messaging. And I just had this gut reaction of, I have to do something about this. This is history repeating itself, essentially.
Absolutely, I can completely understand. I think it's really important because many people sitting at home, sadly, might not actually be aware of the reality of what's going on currently within China in regard to the Uyghurs. So, Julie, would you be able to maybe tell us a bit more about the reality of the situation facing Uyghurs living in China today?
What is happening in terms of what we're calling genocide now, the genocide of the Uyghurs, is something that's really started to exponentially speed up in the last few years, particularly under Xi Jinping. But I do have to acknowledge that Uyghurs also have suffered oppression under the Communist Party since its founding. You'll hear stories of people who talk about concentration camps even from decades ago. This is not necessarily a new thing for China, but what's happening is that there's been massive construction of these camps now, and massive, detainment of Uyghurs based on their ethnicity, essentially. And so what we're hearing in terms of inside the camps, and I would also like to point out that what the media is saying in terms of being 1 million Uyghurs is an old figure from 2018. And we say that 3 million is likely still a conservative estimate. So you have millions of people that are being held in these concentration camps, which China has changed their narrative on several times. When the satellite imagery first started coming out, they kind of denied the existence for a long time. And when it got to the point they couldn't anymore, they said, well, these are vocational schools. And people pointed out, why do vocational schools need guard towers and barbed wire and massive quantities of handcuffs and pepper spray being ordered? They've kind of shifted to this more, well, we're managing extremism and the international community should mind its own business. So their narrative concerning this has shifted several times, but we have had eyewitness testimony from people that were in the camps and got out. There is physical and mental torture happening in these camps. There is rape happening, forced sterilization. It's almost unbelievable that this is happening in the modern age and essentially right in front of our eyes. And then outside of the camps too, life is not free. It's just kind of a continuation of this oppression in this Orwellian police state, where people are living in fear because, saying the wrong thing to the wrong person could land you in the concentration camp. Saying something like Assalamu alaikum, which is a standard greeting in the Muslim world, can land you in a concentration camp. Getting on the wrong side of a Chinese official can land you in a concentration camp. Having a beard, naming your child an Islamic name, having a relative who's abroad, sending money abroad. So both in and outside of the camps, life is just life in a giant prison, essentially. And unfortunately for Uyghurs in diaspora as well, they're not living freely. With COVID, there's a whole new dimension of just added worry as we're seeing reports that Uyghurs are having vaccines and unknown medications tested on them. So what's happening here is just horrific. And it's on a scale unlike anything seen in the modern age.
So I think something like this, for me, that the things you're saying is happening is so harrowing that it's almost, some people may be watching in disbelief. And I think the question that they'll immediately come to is, why would China do this?
Anyone who has any type of religious belief, or really I would classify it more broadly as morality, is viewed as threatening to the Chinese Communist Party, because essentially it threatens their place, their hold over people's minds and hearts. And so if somebody starts to have morality that goes beyond what the Chinese Communist Party has defined that to be, they fear losing control.
I was talking actually to a Uyghur. He's actually a Christian, and he was saying the idea that people think they're all Muslims, whilst the majority of them are Muslims, is partly helping them to fuel Islamophobia and to support of what the Chinese government are doing. Andrew, just then, you talked about how we've got to stop turning them, prevent them from turning into extermination camps, and that clearly feels like another reference to the Nazis. So would you be able to just expound a bit on this?
Those who don't learn from history are just going to suffer history repeating itself again. If you look at what happened in Nazi Germany, the Nazis came to power in 1933, and the final solution, the extermination of the Jews, was only formulated in 1942, 9 years later. And for 9 years, the world did next to nothing. Because the world did nothing for 9 years, these concentration camps turned into extermination camps. It's certain that there are many deaths going on in these camps. You just have to look at what happened at the American Abu Ghraib prisons in Iraq. Where you have authority without responsibility, then you get the most terrible results. That's human nature. So in these camps, you've got people under guard, and nobody, there is no press. The prison guards can do whatever they want. It only takes a matter of time before the most terrible atrocities can and will happen.
I think there's this almost misunderstanding when we talk about atrocities. First of all, we are not seeking to compare with the Holocaust. What we're trying to do is point out that we want to prevent another Holocaust from happening. It is happening again. People have failed to learn from history. Yeah. And at this point, the only thing we are waiting on, mass graves, I guess people are waiting to see that. We already have crematorium being built adjacent to these facilities, and people can get into the nitty-gritty of like, does that mean they're taking everyone out and exterminating them? No, not necessarily. Same as what we saw with the Holocaust, where people, if China can get something out of the situation, they're going to, which is why we have millions of people being moved into factories across China. This has an express goal, which is to essentially breed the Uyghur bloodline out.
I want to thank you both very much. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this podcast, but please make sure to subscribe, because we're going to talk more about this really, really important and devastating issue in the next podcast. So please make sure to subscribe, and we're going to talk also about how foreign policy can be directed regarding China, and what you, our audience, together with us, can do to try and improve the situation. So thank you very much, and goodbye.